Well, I want to thank John for asking me to come in and help with the presentation today. This is kind of a passion of mine. Like you said, I'm a PCO from 6221, and I'm also kind of an independent thinking activist that's supportive of I-522. What I'm going to talk about tonight is my perspective on it. It is not necessarily the perspective of the Yes campaign perspective. It has elements of that, but a lot of this is my perspective. And I think what you're going to hear is a little bit different than what you hear from other places, because I'm coming at it from a perspective of Republican liberty-oriented values. And what I want to do is I'm going to go in and touch on a couple of things that were in the video that we saw, just to kind of bring you up to date on some things that have happened since the video, and also touch on a couple of things that maybe the video didn't talk about that I thought were important to cover. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about how this initiative fits into the principles of liberty, and talk about what the bill does, and then talk about some of the myths that are out there from the no side. All right. So January 16th, 2011, a top USDA scientist, his name was Dr. Don Huber. He was the head of the Emerging Disease and Pathogens Committee at the USDA. He made a discovery of this new pathogen in the soil, and it only seemed to appear in genetically engineered fields that had been treated for several years with the herbicide glyphosate. And the way that this came about is that there were a bunch of animals that were dying and getting very, very sick, eating the silage that came from these fields and getting, some of these microbes. Now, what he was able to do is he got these pathogens, he cultured them from the animals. They were able to take and isolate them, reintroduce them to other animals, and create the illness. And this is a microscopic, virus-sized type of a microbe. He thought that this was really pretty serious stuff. So he wrote a letter to Secretary of Agriculture Vilsack and said, we need to have a moratorium on Roundup Ready crops until we can investigate this further. This is an emergency. 2 weeks later, January 27th, Secretary Vilsack approves Roundup Ready alfalfa. I don't know why he did that, but he chose to ignore the warning from one of his top scientists. September 19th, this is the Seralini study that we just heard about, where the rats were eating the Roundup tolerant corn, and they had all of the disease issues. It was only a couple of weeks later, October 4th of 2012, that the European Food Safety Authority came out and criticized the report, saying that the initial review found that the assumptions and methodologies of the Seralini study were inadequate. And so that really is just, well, if you don't believe something, all you got to do is go attack the researcher and attack the work somehow, and it goes away. But what happened on July 31st this year, just a few weeks ago, is that the EFSA came out and established new criteria for genetically engineered food testing that largely validates all the work that Seralini did. And basically what they did is they were questioning these methodologies. They said, well, we need new methodologies, and they basically defined the same methodologies that Seralini was using. May 1st of 2013, on a different topic, we had genetically engineered wheat positively discovered down in Oregon. I don't know how many people knew about that. What was interesting is that the wheat supposedly had been, the testing on it had stopped, and all of the seeds had been destroyed, according to Monsanto, about 9 years prior to that. So it's kind of a mystery as to how this stuff came about. One of the things that genetically engineered proponents say is that we can control this stuff. Well, how is it, if you can control it, that it suddenly shows up in a field in Oregon and becomes this national issue? A couple weeks later, we saw what the reaction of that was from an economic perspective when Japan halted the U.S. and Washington wheat imports, which puts a big, huge risk at a very major economic force in Washington state. Another perspective on this is the herbicide-resistant weeds. So one of the major reasons, you hear all these really nice ideas about, well, we can make food healthier, we can make it this way, we can make it that way. But 80% of all submissions to the FDA are for weed killer resistance. That's the 80% of them are all that. It's about pairing a seed and a plant with a chemical to be sprayed. And so what was discovered back in 2000 was that in the past 20 years, herbicide-resistant plants have proliferated through the repeated use of the popular herbicides. if the same herbicide site of action is used each year, the trend of more herbicide resistance in weeds will likely continue. So they knew about these. Now, this said 20 years. This goes back to 1980 when the emergence of herbicide-resistant weeds was happening. And they knew that it was a repeated use issue, and they actually modeled what would happen. And they showed that after 5 years to 7 years, you would lose between 80 to 100% of the control effect because you're repeatedly using the same weed killer over and over. This was proved out in 2012 when Pioneer, one of the proponents of genetically engineered, produced a report showing the spread of herbicide-resistant weeds. 27 states, 7 different strains of weeds in Mississippi, 6 in Arkansas, Missouri, and Tennessee, and then you can kind of see the rest of the map. A little bit washed out, but it's there. So we know that this is a big issue. The answer by the proponents is, well, if herbicide Roundup doesn't work anymore, glyphosate doesn't work, let's switch to 2,4-D, which was half of Agent Orange. And when that doesn't work, then we'll switch to a more toxic one. So we're getting into a chemical warfare arms escalation race with nature, and nature's winning. August 16th, 2013, when you think it couldn't get worse, it did. This is just a couple of weeks ago, and a report comes out that says that genetically modified crops has passed benefits to weeds. What it means is that the pollen from a genetically engineered crop has been shown to be able to pass the herbicide resistance trait to weeds without the application of the toxin, the poison. And so what that means is that in the wild, we can start seeing these things popping up just through pollination. We don't have to be spraying the herbicide. The side effect of this was that it not only made them resistant, it increased the seed production in these weeds by 48 to 125%. So not only are we getting weeds that can't be killed with the toxin that we are supposed to be able to kill them with, they now can proliferate at rates that we've never seen before. Now, a lot of people have asked me, why the push for labels? Well, you heard in the movie that about 70 to 80% of packaged food is genetically engineered. Now, I use the word GMO. I don't want this to get confusing. GMO is an umbrella term that's used by the FDA, but the rest of the world thinks of it as these genetically engineered things. These are not your father's hybrid. It's not taking 2 tomato plants and putting them together. It's taking a bacteria and combining it into corn. It's taking a virus and putting it into corn. It's taking an eel and putting it into a salmon. It's taking human DNA, putting it into a cow so that the cow can produce human milk. Now, I don't know about you, but I look at that and go, did God really want us to do that? If he did, then why are we not out committing sodomy? Now, the key reasons here, disbelief and trust. Distrust over safety. That's one of the issues. That's one of the reasons why we have this coming to the table. People don't necessarily believe what the chemical companies are telling us. Another one is what is happening with the environment. We're destroying the ground. We know that the glyphosate was a chelator. It binds together the nutrients and makes it bio-unavailable into the plants. So we're getting plants that don't have any nutritional value in them. A lot of people are concerned about the economic issues of this. We saw what happened when Japan decided they would stop their wheat issues because we couldn't control the genetically engineered stuff. A lot of people dislike or abhor the risks of natural seed stock problems. Here we've got this ability, pollen knows no boundaries. It doesn't pay attention to property rights stuff for us. So a neighboring crop grows GMO and the pollen blows across and it pollutes my crop, now I'm contaminated. And when you have 90% of the corn out there, about 88% of the corn out there, we only have 12% left that's natural corn. So what happens when that starts blowing around? Suddenly we start seeing a depletion in our natural seed stock. And then, of course, the religious and ethical objections. Whether you believe in God or you believe in evolution, it doesn't really matter. The question is, there's a reason we can't breed with bacteria and with cows. Now, if you're going to go out and buy a car, and you had real strong preferences, you're American, you want to buy an American car, you want to know what the gas mileage is, you want to know what safety features and things are, you have the ability to go up and read the sticker on that window and go look up the information on that car and know where it's coming from. But suppose that somebody takes that away from you and you don't have any of that information and the cars all start looking the same and there's a bunch of these cheap Japanese imports that are coming in and they're flooding the market and you can't really tell one from the other. They're just out there. So what does that mean? How free is a free market when the consumer is denied access to information that's necessary for them to make a choice on what they want to buy, especially when the market is flooded with that which they do not want to have? And the answer is that a free market can only be free if the consumer has the information that they need to make a decision. That's the only way we can have a free market. Otherwise, it's the companies, it's the industry that makes the decision for us. It's not us. Let's take a look at the rules of deregulation and the landscape for genetically engineered crops. So man takes and splices DNA between two different species and gets to patent it because he created it. It's not something that was made in nature. The FDA requires that created life can pollinate with non-genetically engineered counterparts. So if I'm going to make a genetically engineered corn, it has to, by law, be able to pollinate with non-genetically engineered corn. Otherwise, it's not considered substantially equivalent to be deregulated. Now, the FDA says, well, we also need some safety tests. But the FDA, the EPA, and the USDA, we're not going to do any testing. That's all up to you, Mr. Creator. Monsanto, you go ahead and do the testing. But by the way, we want you to know that we're not going to look at your data, and this is actually on their website, on their guidelines to the industry. We aren't going to look at your data. You just put together the summary report stuff and submit that. That's all we're going to look at. Now, I don't know about you, but I look at that and go, if I stand to make billions of dollars and I see a problem in my test data, what would I do to my test data? Especially given that the FDA says, oh, by the way, we know this is your intellectual property and we want to protect that, so you don't really have to share this with anybody openly. You just got to give it to us, but you don't need to open it for public peer review because they might learn something about your genetically engineered stuff. So then they go on and do their testing, and the FDA says, well, 60-day tests are okay. That's all we need to take a look at. But Cirolini shows us otherwise. And then the FDA says, well, we're also not going to look at additives. Additives, those things like table salt and glyphosate, weed killer. The EPA looks at that. They take care of that for us. And what does the EPA do? They rubber stamp the increase in glyphosate content in our food every single time that Monsanto comes out and asks for it. It has gone up 4 times since 1996. They've increased the level of glyphosate content in our food. The most recent one puts sweet corn at 3 parts per million, and it puts forage corn at 13 parts per million. Okay? Forage corn goes into your corn flakes, and sweet corn goes onto your plate on corn on the cob. Now, how does that compare to things? The EPA set guidelines for water a long time ago. It was 0.7 parts per million is the maximum in water. They say on the website that above this for short periods of time causes respiration and congestion problems, and for long periods of time it can cause kidney damage and reproductive issues. Now, why is it that we can have 4 times that amount in our sweet corn and 16 times that amount into our corn flakes, and that's not a problem? I don't get that. And what if we add that to the water that we're drinking that's already up there as well? But nonetheless, the FDA will look at the report and they'll say, well, we're not going to say that it's safe, but we will say Monsanto says it's safe. And then Monsanto turns around and tells the public, oh, hey, this stuff is safe because the FDA said it was safe. But the FDA never says it's safe. If you read the letter that does the deregulation, it says, we have reviewed your test and you have said that this is safe. That's basically what it says. FDA never declares it safe. And of course, the creators are not going to say anything because if they do, the public's going to know, oh, you said it's safe. You did all the testing. Isn't there a conflict of interest? So they don't want to say that. They want to point to the FDA and say that they made it safe. Now, how does that all happen? Oh, and then in addition to that, they come back and say, well, no labels are needed because this is substantially equivalent. How did this happen? A guy named Michael Taylor, an attorney that worked at King & Spalding. He was the attorney for Monsanto. He worked there for many years working on the Monsanto side, trying to get in the lobbying capacity of getting genetically engineered crops adopted. He then moved from King & Spalding into the FDA, and he worked and was instrumental in crafting all of the policies the FDA has around genetically engineered food. Then he left and he went back to Monsanto, and he became a vice president there and headed up their public policy on genetically engineered food, having all this knowledge of the inner workings of the FDA. And then he goes back into the FDA now and is basically the czar of genetically engineered food control in the FDA. So it really kind of points to an interesting picture of how corporations control the policies in our government. Now we have the industry attack on nature and farmers. Well, we already know about the serious issues. We talked about those, and I'm not going to go into those further. And then we know about nature fighting back. We've talked about weed killer resistant weeds. But we also haven't talked about the insect resistant insects too much. That was where we created Bt toxin that goes into every single cell of the corn to kill the insects. And now we're finding out those insects are just fat, dumb, and happy to eat on that stuff all day long. So now the recommendation is to use that corn with the Bt toxin in it, add some more insecticide to the crops, and rotate your fields, where rotating your fields would have solved the problem all along. And now we've got the GMO, an additional problem. The GMO creators are suing non-GMO farmers that they polluted. So an example of that is Percy Schmeiser up in Canada. He had a canola, he was a canola farmer. He's out spraying around his telephone poles and discovers the canola's not dying. What's wrong with this? It should be dying. I'm spraying it with weeds. I don't want to clear out the space around my poles. He doesn't really know what to make of it exactly, but he does what he has done every single year of his life. He has been developing his own strains, or his own hybridization of canola to have something that grows well in his area. He harvests his crop, he replants his seed. Monsanto comes in, storms in his property, tests the stuff and says, oh, that's got our patented traits in it. Doesn't matter that it blew into your field, it's got our patented traits. So we're suing you for patent infringement. He had to go through the court system. Ultimately, the court did not fine him for any patent infringement, but he had to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to defend himself for being polluted by a neighboring farm or by a truck that drove by. Because of these issues, there's a lot of outrage in the world, and that's why there are 64 countries today that require labeling. So the United States happens to not be one of them, but everybody else does, including communist China. Now, I don't know about you, but when I grew up and I went to school, what I heard was those damn commies, they don't let you learn what you need to learn. They burn books, they hide information. Why is it that I don't have the right to know what's in my food, and communist Chinese citizens do? Why is that? I thought we were the people that had freedom and liberty, not control. Now, it's not the rest of the world that's only concerned about this. An omnibus poll done by YouGov in February 28th to March 1st of this year, 87% of the Democrats, 80% of independents, and 80% of Republicans say label genetically engineered food. This is not something that is just a few people. The FDA, in spite of that, refuses to require labels, and so the people started fighting back. So the first instance of that was Proposition 37. It was a grassroots organization. They through the grassroots, collected $7 million to go off and try and get labeling to be done. And it had huge support. Everybody was in favor of it. And then all of a sudden, in the last couple of weeks of the election, something dramatic happened, and it failed by a thin margin. So what was it that happened? Well, the Grocery Manufacturers Association, Monsanto, Pioneer DuPont, Bayer Crop Science, and Dow AgriSciences, along with a few others, but these are the main five, gathered $45 million to crush this thing. And they took that money and they went out and they pounded these infomercials or all these false information out into people for the last couple of weeks and flipped the decision. The myths they were pushing were it was going to increase our grocery bills, it has arbitrary exemptions, it has shakedown lawsuits, significant bureaucracy, and special labels that no other state has. Those are the key arguments. Now I'm going to go into those a little bit later, so I'm not going to dwell on them right now. But what happened with that failure is it kind of steeled the rest of the United States. They were incensed by this. And so what has happened since then is 2 states, Connecticut and Maine, have passed genetically engineered laws. They are pending some triggers to be activated, but they are passed. And we have other states in the Northeast that are doing the same. There are 26 different states with legislation in progress, and Washington is one of those. Here in Washington, it's the Yes on 522 campaign to label genetically engineered food, and you all have a copy of that tonight. Now, whoops, let's go back here this way. All right, there we go. So now we have a campaign going, and we've got sides. And so those sides have to be tracked. So the Public Disclosure Commission is showing us how much money is being collected and who that's being done by. So far, the no side has raised $3.25 million. Interestingly, just the other day, it was only at $945. So we can see that the money bags are starting to drop into Washington State to fight against this. They've spent about $800,000 so far on campaigning. The yes side has about $3.27 million, and they spent just a little over $500,000. So who's there? Wow, it's the same 5 companies that were in California. In fact, there are no other contributors in the state of Washington to that campaign, not one above a dollar value that's reported underneath the Public Disclosure Commission. There are 7 total contributions by 7 companies, and that's it. On the yes side, we have about 8 different companies that have each contributed over $50,000. There's another 29 others that have done over $10,000 and 1,728 total contributions. Little bit different picture of who's interested here. Where are they coming from? Not one of them from Washington State on the no side. Not one contributor. On the yes side, 1,491 contributions totaling $894,000 is coming from Washington State. It shows that this is an interesting issue for Washington State. Washington State people want it, and it's the outside multinational companies that don't want it. And why do they not want it? The same reason that what happened in Europe. They know that if it gets labeled, it's going to make it difficult for them to sell. It has nothing to do with anything else. It has to do with they're frightened that they're going to lose their business over free market choice. Let's look at see what Thomas Jefferson has to say about this stuff. To compel a man to furnish funds for the propagation of ideas he disbelieves or abhors is sinful and tyrannical. He also says, a wise and frugal government which shall restrain men from injuring one another, which shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement, and shall not take from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned. This is the sum of good government, and this is necessary to close the circle of our felicities. All right, so how does this apply in the case of genetically engineered food? It is tyrannical to compel a man to unknowingly purchase GMO food when he disbelieves and abhors the technology. And that's what's going on. Now, some people will say, oh, but you could go buy certified organic, or you could go buy certified non-GMO. Yeah, I could do that if it was available to me in every single store and gave me the same breadth of choice, and it wasn't expensive, because they have to go through expensive recertification all the time. That's why it's expensive. They have a lot of costs there. We're not talking about certification in the case of 522. It is the government's responsibility to restrain the food industry from damaging the people who abhor the technology in a way that leaves people free to regulate their own pursuit of industry while not taking from the mouth of people in industry in taxes and onerous implementation costs. So that's my interpretation from a liberty-seeking perspective on why this is an important law. And labeling lets consumers know what they are buying with no real cost to the industry. It empowers people to be free to regulate their own pursuit of the food industry without the government taking through significant taxes or onerous implementation costs. So I think that this is the most efficient and low-cost way of letting us know what we're eating and letting us decide in a free market economy what we're going to buy. What does 522 really do? Well, it allows us to join the 2 other states and 64 other countries. And yes, we'll be one of the leaders in the 26 that also have legislation. So we're not alone in this. It's not just like Washington is just a little rabble-rouser over here that's doing this on its own. It requires labels if 1% or more of the genetically engineered, if the food is genetically engineered content. And it gives them 18 months to prepare for the label change. Okay, 18 months so that they can integrate it into a normal change that they're going to do with their labels anyway. It follows existing point of consumption food label standards and leaves alcohol ruled by Title 66. It did not add more bureaucracy by changing the way that restaurants and alcohol sales have to work. It focused strictly on food and didn't add more bureaucracy that way. No penalties to farmers or packagers who violate the law without knowing. So if my crop gets polluted and someone comes after me and I can show, because everything's labeled, it's full disclosure up through the entire supply chain, if I can show, look, all the stuff I bought and put into my ingredients say that they weren't genetically engineered, I am not going to have a problem because the law says that. It funds the Department of Health to enforce labels. Now, what happens here is the Department of Health and the Department of the Attorney General Office and the alleged violator get 60 days of notice before the lawsuit can possibly be filed. So they have 60 days to do an investigation to find out, did this company know or not know? Are they legit or not legit? Now, if the DOH comes out and says, well, we didn't find anything wrong, what lawyer is going to go after that? And even if they do, judges are not required to award to the prevailing plaintiff. So even if someone is guilty of knowingly selling genetically engineered crops or food without a label, there's no guarantee that the trial lawyer is going to get a dime from the judge. The cost of the taxpayers? Less than 10 cents per year per person in the state of Washington. It's $3.3 million. It's 8 cents per year. And the label cost update, well, they've got a lot of runway, and if they think about it a little bit, just a little bit, and I'm a business owner and I worked in major companies that did a lot of packaging, they just have to think about it a little bit and it'll be fine. So it provides protections for the people, minimum bureaucracy, protections for farmers and packagers, and minimal cost. Let's talk about the myths. Higher grocery bills, arbitrary exemptions, and so forth. They're the exact same. Even the local looks a lot like California because it's the same people. Higher grocery bills? From what? Please tell me. There's no certification process, no taxes, no mandated inspections. Are they worried they won't change their label in the next 18 months? This is cornflakes. If that's 18 months, that represents 18 years worth of cornflakes boxes. And I'm sorry, that's not 18 years worth of cornflakes boxes. We know that they have holiday versions and everything else. Does it cost more to print and save a receipt that has 7 more words printed on it? Is the ink cost that much? I don't know where the costs are coming from. They haven't told us. Another example is they say, well, pizza sold in boxes at the grocery store would need special labels. The same pizza box delivered would be exempt. That's confusing. Are the ingredients of a delivered pizza listed on the box now?
No.
How many people look? Of course not. Everybody knows that. There's nothing confusing about that. Are the chemical companies saying they should be? Maybe that's what they're saying. But wait a minute. They're against labeling, aren't they? So who's confused here? Shakedown lawsuits? Show me the money. Lawyers like to be paid. If your receipts don't show that it's GMO, then you're not guilty. If you get found that you're packaging it and you can show that, hey, I've got all this stuff from my supply chain and it doesn't say that I have it in there, then they're going to go back into your supply chain and they're going to find out where that's coming from and get it corrected. You have 60 days, so that, like I said, 60 days before the lawsuit will happen, and that gives time for the DOH to step in and say there's no wrongdoing found, or there is wrongdoing, and if the person complaining wants to proceed, then there's no guarantee for the prevailing plaintiff. Significant bureaucracy. I've read this. Where is it? There's no certification agency, no monitoring agency. No, the OFM only says it's $3.3 million, which is that less than 10 cents a year. No other state has the law. Well, actually 2 do, but there are 64 countries that do. And the companies that are dealing with this, they've been dealing with this. They go out and sell food to these other countries. They don't just sell to the United States. A good example of that, here's Cake Mate from McCormick Foods. They don't have any trouble. This is a Cake Mate bottle, and right here in the fine print here, it says, where is it? Genetically modified something. It's maladoxin or something I can't pronounce. Anyway, that same frosting is sold in the United States with no label, but it's sold in Australia with a label. This is what it's about. It's the balance of who gets the benefit. Are we here to support 4 companies and a grocery manufacturer association full of huge multinational companies that don't want you to know what's in your food so they get a free ride to make billions of dollars? Or are we going to support the people? 4.5, if only 65% of Washington wanted this to happen, it'd be 4.5 billion people in Washington state that want this to happen. And are we going to support the freedom from tyranny by corporate-controlled FDA? And that's what this is about. So when I look at this, I look at it as the 522 is the least costly, the least invasive, the least bureaucratic way of creating a way for transparency so that I can make a decision for myself. It doesn't say that the farmers can't grow genetically engineered food. It doesn't say that they can't use pesticides or herbicides. It doesn't say that they can't use any future technologies. It doesn't say that they can't do research. It says that I get to know so I can decide whether my money is going towards something that I abhor. And that's what the tyranny issue is. So I think it's liberty principled, and I think that this is why you should vote yes on 522. Any questions?
Questions and answers.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about my wife? We have a garden. We try to grow our stuff. How do we know the seeds we're buying are the good ones or the bad ones?
Well, today
And if we use
Yeah.
Roundup in our garden,
Mhm.
we shouldn't be using that, I suppose.
Well, I'm not going to comment about how much glyphosate you should use in your garden. I mean, the one thing about the genetically engineered crops is they're now crop dusting and they're doing it multiple times and they're doing it year after year after year. And so the amounts that they're putting on may be higher than what you're doing. But in terms of the seeds, that how do you know? The genetically engineered food seeds, they want them absolutely controlled. It's their intellectual property. That's why they went after Percy Schmeiser. So what they do is they already have these seeds labeled. Now, this is just to ensure that the consumer gets labeling if they get a little consumer package of seeds, but they're already labeling this. In fact, they go more than labeling. They make you sign a special agreement that tells you that you will not save your seeds and you will grow it exactly according to their required growing practices, which includes, that means you must use my pesticide and you must use it at this level. And so they have a lot of controls around you if you buy it. So if you're a consumer today buying seeds, you're probably not going to get a lot of genetically engineered stuff. But if you're growing stuff and your neighbor is a bigger farmer and they are doing that, there's nothing that would stop the pollen from coming in and polluting your crops. Yeah.
So
Part of an answer to that is just simply buy heritage seeds that are open pollinated, and you can be
Absolutely.
pretty certain that it's not genetically modified. Every day it seems like I have an opportunity to witness the abuse of the bureaucracies in Washington State upon its people. And the abuse stems primarily from how the legislature has allowed these executive branch agencies to write their own whacks without providing adequate firewalls to prevent them from getting out of hand. And I do see, although my wife and I take great pains to make certain that we stay away from genetically modified organisms, and we grow everything that we possibly can for our own consumption. But it does bother me that as the new section 4, is a wide open invitation for abuse, in my personal opinion.
Versus the DOH can establish the...
Adopt rules necessary to implement the chapter.
Mhm.
And we have seen great license used by the agencies to write these, the Washington Administrative Code cited them, and to also write them in such a way that they can be interpreted many, many different ways. So looking at the Department of Health's history and the number of cases I currently have in my file, I would hesitate at allowing the Department of Health to write anything that wasn't well defined previously by the legislature. And do you have any comments on that?
Well, I understand what your concern is. My wife and I operate an adult family home, and we're under the DSHS,
yeah.
right?
So you're very well.
So I understand the WAC issue. I had an inspection this week, so I mean, and then you take it to the next level, and the inspectors, then they interpret the WACs, and then you get even a third level of that. So I know what you're talking about there. But I guess the answer that I have is that the core of the initiative defines some key principles.
Mm-hmm.
That you're not guilty if you didn't know, and that protects people from being subjected to a lot of abuses there. The other thing is that there is the OFM has said it shouldn't take that much money. It's only about $3.3 million. I think the DOH, given the crisis that our government is in, is going to be hard pressed to go get money to ramp up and make a huge organization that's going to cost a ton of money. I don't think that people are going to sit still for that in the state. It really, there's when you get into the WACs, there's not really any guarantees anywhere in Washington State on that front. But I think that at least the framework of this, in terms of what has to be labeled and what doesn't have to be labeled, that's pretty clear. We're talking about anything that is splicing genes, doing recombinant DNA, things that are not about cross-pollinating and hybridization. So we know what that is. We know what practices what protections that are in there and so forth. So I think that they have to stay within those boundaries, and I think that will provide us some relief on that front.
And Jim, Thomas Jefferson always said, they're gonna take and twist you can't write something if you have a person who wants to be tyrannical. You really can't write it. The people have got to stay on
Yeah.
it and prevent it. That's the
Yeah.
only way.
The only other, okay,
Oh,
the
okay.
other part of my question is the hybridization techniques that are beyond the natural hybridization techniques, natural hybridization, but there are some hybridization techniques that are not natural, that are man-driven, so those ag experimenters can monitor the results. So how does the clause in 3A protect natural and man-driven hybridization, real hybridization
3A.
among similar species?
That would include your wheat. I think that you're looking by allowing the Department of Health to define terms, because this is all gonna go to court. And you're allowing the Department of Health, because it goes to the Attorney General, you're allowing the Attorney General and the Department of Health to define these terms and to interpret these terms. Does that concern you?
No, because I think that the terms that are there are generally accepted scientific terms that are there. They're not gonna, I don't think that they're not, we're talking about taking DNA between different species that cannot breed. That's what we're talking about. It's not talking about taking tomatoes and making other tomatoes with tomatoes. We're talking about taking bacteria and things, humans and things, eels and salmon, that kind of stuff. It's crossing we're not going vertically within a species, we're going horizontally across all species.
Not within a family,
Yeah,
but across.
yeah, we're going
the
across them, and that's what this is about.
Yeah, but don't you think, have you read that term hybridization? It says, or hybridization techniques that overcome natural, physiological, reproductive, and recombination barriers. That's wheat. That's all the wheat that's on the face of the earth right now.
But continue reading, Cindy.
Okay. That overcome natural, physiological, reproductive, where the donor cells or protoplasts do not fall within the same taxonomic family.
That's what they're talking about. They're saying if it's vertical, it's okay. When you go horizontally, it's not. That's what they're saying.
So you believe
yeah,
that?
I believe that there is not going to be a perversion of that. I don't
So
believe
you don't
that.
believe that wheat would be included in this and could be
Wheat
attacked?
would be when they start putting bacteria and virus genes into it to make it glyphosate resistant or produce some other pesticide inside of it. Yeah.
Remember the vertical classifications in basic biology? You start with
Right.
family, you go down to all the taxonomic. Okay, what they're talking about is that these vertical combinations within a single family happen naturally and under controlled conditions, but it's a cross from family to family, like elephants and lizards.
Right. But what about the plant world?
Actually,
Same
it
thing.
can be a tomato with a tomato. It can be a potato with a potato. It's the technique of how they're crossing, so they could be making a blight-resistant potato, but they're not doing it through the male-female traditional ways.
That's
They're
right.
doing it horizontally in a lab. They're just taking the DNA and putting it together DNA. So it doesn't have to be swapping species. It can be the same plant. And so that's what this is specifically, what they're talking
Yeah.
about. It's the specific technique. What is genetic engineering?
I tend to, I tend to agree with what you're trying to do, but the methodology is really shaky. One, what is the Department of Health? Where did they get the biology and everything else and foodstuffs? Where's their expertise? It should be under the Department of Agriculture. That's just a technical defect. And then as far as the rules, they need to be written in this thing. Don't you dare let these guys start writing their own rules. You're gonna have problems you can't even conceive of. Watch what they're doing. We're seeing it already in the Obamacare thing. We don't want to get into that, but I think you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I think that this fundamentally is a good idea, but I think it needed a lot more work before it made prime time. That's
Yeah.
my
From my perspective, I worry more about my health than I do whether there's an abuse there. We can go back as voters and correct the abuse. I can't go correct my body if they kill me.
that doesn't work for me. I'm sorry. I've seen too many people have their body killed because people didn't care about the details.
initiatives cannot be too complex or they won't. be
Yeah,
followed.
exactly.
This, you have to put trust in the legislators and hopefully that they will do it, and if not, you work on it. Back to this thing that you were saying, it's the PPA, which was in the 1930s, they came out and they allowed what we're talking about. If it is not naturally reproduced in nature, then it's patentable. You see what I mean, under the PPA. So that's the key there. Is it something that will naturally reproduce? If you take this and you take this and you create something in the lab and it will not then naturally recreate, then you have a patent on it. There's rules that have been around forever. In the 70s, they changed it. So, I mean, that is
Yep.
law that's
Yeah,
set.
there's, those boundaries are not going to be crossed.
Yeah, no.
That's pretty well defined here. I mean, the language may be foreign to us, but that's pretty well defined.
How has this worked out in Connecticut? I mean, so far, what are the problems that are
So,
coming up?
well, they have passed it. It is waiting for triggers to be, to go into effect. So they haven't, there are no labels in Connecticut yet. It's a bill that's waiting to be triggered.
How long did they give them?
Theirs is interesting because it's based upon some other states adopting it. One of the big issues here is that Monsanto has already said, any state that passes this, we're going to go after them and sue them because they got big bags of money. And Connecticut would fit in Spokane. And they don't have big bags of money. But they know that they want this label. So what they did is they had to protect themselves and say, well, our laws will go into effect when there's some more people there, so we're not the sole people getting sued because we can't afford that.
And then there's dishwasher soap.
I think a good question to ask too is what would happen if we don't have a label?
Mhm.
And this would be the second state that, you know, I think that's the kind of the trail to go down is what happens if you don't label.
Parts of the world where they do have this type of labeling area,
Mhm.
has it had a change in what people are demanding?
Oh,
In Europe, you would be hard pressed to buy genetically engineered food in Europe. The people, as soon as the labeling went on, they just stopped selling it. In fact, I have friends that come over from Europe and they go, "Man, I don't understand your food over here. In Europe, our food goes bad. Our food will go bad. Here, the food doesn't go bad.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that? That's not natural. Food does rot. Everybody here that's a farmer knows that." Yeah.
You have a pretty good presentation here, and you've made it very obvious to what extent the agrochemical companies are willing to go, the amount of money they're willing to spend to oppose labeling.
Mm-hmm.
But you've also shown how much money they're willing to spend to label every single seed that they produce.
Mm-hmm.
It's astronomical, the research, the science, the amount of money that's spent to do that, but they have this argument that it's too expensive to put the ink on blocks.
Yeah, especially if you look at their balance sheets and look at their profits, then what's happened to them since 1996, when they didn't have seeds, they used to just spare chemicals. Now they get the seed sales and they get the chemical sales. And one of the things I forgot to mention is that there used to be this EPA report that came out, and it got stopped in 2008. Obama told them, "Oh, stop publishing this thing, it's causing us problems." And it showed how much glyphosate gets used in the United States. It went up 14 times from 1996 to 2007. It was a huge increase in the amount of glyphosate that was used. The big argument for this stuff is we'll use fewer pesticides. But that wasn't true. And it started to create a problem for them. They stopped publishing the reports, so we don't really know how much glyphosate's actually being used, but we know that it's dramatically more than it was in 1996.
Because of resistant.
Yeah,
Weeds.
resistant weeds, and they spray more and spray more and spray more. Plus, there's more of the genetically engineered crops, and those have to be sprayed because of the regulations. When you sign your agreement to get the seeds, you have to grow it the way that they want you to grow it, which means you're going to spray your crops. Yeah.
What is glyphosate?
Glyphosate is the active ingredient that's in Roundup and in other commercial herbicides, and what it does is it disrupts a thing called the Shikimate pathway in the plant, which prevents it from being able to develop and assimilate amino acids. It disrupts the amino acid system. And so when that happens, the plant gets sick. It doesn't die, but it gives it basically chemically induced AIDS. And then what happens is the microbes from the soil start to attack the plant, and then the plant dies. So it's actually the microbes in the soil that are causing the death of the plant because the plant got sick. And in fact, if you look at some of the research, you'll see where they take tests and they have glyphosate sprayed on weeds that should be killed, and they put them in sterilized soil and they don't die. But if they put them in non-sterilized soil, then they do die. So that's the pathway that gets disrupted with glyphosate. Yeah. Oh, I want to add one more thing. Glyphosate also was first licensed as a chelator, which means it binds together things, and it binds together nutrients like calcium and manganese and magnesium, all of the essential nutrients that we need in our body. It binds it together in the soil. You spray it on the plants, and it binds in the plants, and then you eat it, and it binds in our bodies. So we're getting more and more depleted of the bionutrients that we need because of the chelation processes in glyphosate. And in fact, earlier this spring, there was a test done on some corn. There was a company that wanted to go out and source some corn, and they went out and took some corn out of a non-genetically engineered field, and they took some corn out of a genetically engineered field. They went into a lab, they ran it through a mass spectrometer, and they started looking at what the content was. And the results, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was astonishing. There was virtually no calcium in the genetically engineered corn, almost none. But there was formaldehyde. Formaldehyde was in there, and I don't know that anybody's really researched to say what happens to the chemical processes in the plant and what are the byproducts of it having that glyphosate in there. They also found the glyphosate at 13 parts per million, which is indicative of there we go of forage corn. So
could you explain to a lot of people don't understand what they do with Roundup Ready, corn Roundup Ready, alfalfa, that they can essentially spray right over the top of it.
Yes.
And it kills everything but their row crop.
Yep.
And
that was the purpose of this. So what they wanted to do is, Tom Stahl has a really great way of putting this. He says, farmers are not supposed to have weeds. A good farmer doesn't have weeds. And so they've convinced us of that, and so the way to get rid of it is the chemicals. But if we were spraying our crops, we'd kill the crops. And that'd be a problem. So it's hard to get rid of our weeds. So being good farmers and getting rid of our weeds is important. So they made these crops that I could spray the crops and the weeds. The crops would live and the weeds would die, and we'd be good farmers. And so that's kind of the idea behind that. And it's interesting. You look at the promises of genetically modified foods, the engineered foods. It was all about, well, we can make them more nutritious, and we can make them, drought resistant. We can feed the world, and we can do all that stuff. But what they're building are things that sell chemicals. And then if you look at the results, they're not outperforming non-genetically engineered crops in yield. And in fact, double-stacked corn, which has the Bt toxin and the herbicide resistance trait, those crops underperform in drought conditions versus non-genetically engineered crops. And the other thing that's really interesting is they talk about, they'll increase the yield. The way they achieve that is they do hybrid processes to get a plant that produces the best, then they insert it with the bacteria to make it resistant to Roundup. They don't add the genes to increase its yield. That's not the part, you get that from the hybridization. You don't get that from the bacterial breeding part of that. And so they're actually making claims about genetically engineered processes that are false. They should be attributing them to the non-genetically engineered process that was used to create the base core system that they go in and affect with the bacteria and the viruses.
Could we have one last question?
Sure.
I'd like to find out who wrote this initiative and why did they decide on the Department of Health as being the department in Washington State that oversees this labeling. That bothers me a lot because the Department of Health is the same organization that recommends all the vaccines and vaccinations and that kind of thing. So if they're really looking out for our health, why would you choose the Department of Health? Whoever wrote this? What was their purpose to use that organization?
I'm not going to answer that because I don't know the answer. I could speculate, and my speculation is that agency was responsible for the food labeling, other food labeling, but I don't know. I don't know the answer to that one. I'd have to investigate that. Andy, do you know the history of that?
Who were the sponsors of it again? Who wrote it?
They worked with Kimberl and some attorneys in DC and some other, I can't remember the names of the people. And they went thoroughly, and they also have to go along with the Washington state laws. There was a lot of thought put into this.
It's it's good.
And they all testified in Olympia, when this first thing was presented to the hearings. So.
Okay.
I have one really quick comment, and I just want people in Washington State to know that Washington State is the state that was the first state that passed a law to label fish as to whether it was farmed or whether it was wild. And now the rest of the country loves that. They go yay, and we all know how important that was. And to me, Washington State really has a chance with this initiative. If we could be stronger than California and vote yes on this, we have a chance of really changing how the food industry and the big companies are basically controlling our lives. And I think it's something we should be proud of, that we are the ones that cause the fish to be identified.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm going to leave these on the table if you want one. This basically is just the reference list. It has all the websites for all of the things that I said, so you can go and do more investigation if you'd like.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think we all appreciate it. Well, we're going to invite Brian Murray forward, and he'll introduce himself, and he's got 15 minutes, and then we'll go into a 5-minute rebuttal period and an end of 10 minutes of questions. Okay, are we ready? John, are you filming Brian? Yeah. Okay, Brian, you're being filmed. This is a public meeting. So I want you to know that he is filming.
I did see the camera, so thank you.
It's on.
Thank you.
So you know.
So, for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Brian Murray. I've been involved with politics in Spokane for almost 20 years now, various campaigns. This is a very important issue for our state. I'd like to do a quick survey. How many folks in this room have actually read the initiative? Good. How many folks in this room believe in individual liberty and choice? How many people in this room want the government telling you what to do?
If it's informing me, I would like that.
Accurately informing.
It's actually not the government doing it.
No.
Government's not telling us.
Well, it will be the government, because it's going to be the Department of Health telling farmers how to farm.
So,
I wish I could actually go through the PowerPoint presentation slide by slide. The Yes campaign, if this was a simple labeling bill, it would be a completely different story. They want you to believe this is a simple labeling bill. Nothing could be further from the truth. They want to talk about multinational corporations. They want to talk about Monsanto. Let's talk about the 42,000 farmers who are opposed to Initiative 522.
How many of those 45,000 farmers are in the Monsanto program?
That I don't know.
Can we let Brian finish his presentation,
Yes.
please? 15 minutes.
Thank you.
sorry.
We believe, so I represent the No on 522 campaign coalition. We are a coalition made up of individuals across the state of Washington, businesses, farmers, unions, Republicans, Democrats, all with a single purpose: to preserve farming in the state of Washington. The requirements and exemptions make absolutely no sense under 522. This will hurt food companies and farmers. The mandates are costly and completely unnecessary, and it will lead to higher bureaucracy and food costs in the state of Washington. Let's talk about those big multinational food corporations. How many of you know about Cyrus O'Leary pies here in Spokane? How many of you have had their pies? If you like their pies, I like their pecan pie at Thanksgiving time. They would not be able to sell pies in the state of Washington under 522. They have looked at Prop 37 in California. They have looked at this. They've also looked at doing gluten-free pies. And if you go to do a gluten-free pie, you have to have a completely clean, sterile facility. It would be the same thing under 522. If they were to make a GMO pie and a non-GMO pie, they would have to have a new facility for the non-GMO pie. And they can't do it. They are not a multinational corporation. They are a small business in our community that employs folks, that employ your friends, your neighbors, right here in Spokane. They are not the multinational corporation that the Yes campaign wants you to believe. The exemptions are arbitrary and make absolutely no sense. For example, dog food you feed your dog would have to be labeled, but the beef you feed your family would not. I'll say that again. The dog food you feed your dog would have to be labeled, but the beef you feed your family would not have to be labeled. The pizza you would buy at the grocery store would have to be labeled. The pizza delivered would not have to be labeled. We're not saying it's confusing. We're saying it's ridiculous that one would have to be labeled and not the other. We have members of our coalition that want nationwide labeling. We have members of our coalition that want no labeling. If this was a simple labeling bill, it would be a different story. I'll talk about farmers for a minute. So if you're familiar with farmers, they rotate their crops. Okay? Under 522, by 2019, there is a zero tolerance for cross-contamination. So what that means to Farmer Bob, if he's doing wheat on parcel A, which is a non-GMO product, canola on parcel B, which is a GMO product, he would have to make a choice. Do I continue crop rotations between parcel A, parcel B? Or do I get out of the business of one or the other? Because under 522, with zero cross-contamination, he would have to buy new equipment. If you're a grain elevator operator, you could not run corn one day and then wheat the next because of the cross-contamination. This puts farmers, our family farms, at a competitive disadvantage in the state of Washington. They talk about the 60 days. The one thing they haven't mentioned is the $1,000 per day fine that the Department of Health can assess. $1,000 a day. Our family farms are not in the business of defending themselves in court. There is a provision in the initiative called the Bounty Hunter Clause. The Bounty Hunter Clause encourages people to file lawsuits. You go into the grocery store. You don't even have to be from our state. You go into the grocery store, you feel as though the product's not properly labeled. You go get your attorney. You sue the grocery store, the food processor, the farmer, the seed company. You sue everyone along that distribution food chain. They all, in turn, have to go get attorneys and defend themselves. So instead of being a farmer out farming the land, they have to defend themselves. They have to keep detailed records of their products. Once and if the lawsuit was tossed out, there is no retribution for that farmer. So they have spent their precious resources to defend themselves against frivolous lawsuits. This will lead to more lawsuits, without a doubt. They haven't mentioned one other thing. Food prices will go up. Washington is 2% of the overall food consumption in the nation. Just 2%. So what's going to happen if you're a food producer and you have to comply with these new regulations for 2%? You'll walk away from the state of Washington. We have members of our coalition that said they will not comply with this. They will walk away from the state of Washington if this passes. So what's going to happen? Supply is going to go down, prices are going to go up. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect is, under Prop 37, they did an economic analysis. They figured, the average family of 4 probably goes to the grocery store 50 times per year. You have 40 to 50 items in your basket every time you go to the grocery store if you have a family, luckily, hopefully. Conservatively, at 5 cents per item for either reformulation, relabeling, whatever it happens to be, that's $400 per year. If you're on a fixed income, that is a huge chunk coming out of your pocket on a yearly basis for increased food costs. A lot of us in here could probably absorb that cost, but it'd be a pain in the butt. And we'd figure out a way to make it happen. But if you're on a fixed income, if you go to a food bank, that's going to decrease the amount of power you have, purchasing power, to buy that food. One point, and I wish the PowerPoint was still up, they talked about choice. You have a choice. You have a choice as a consumer right now. You can buy USDA organic, you can buy the GMO-free certified project. You have that choice as a consumer. It's in the grocery stores now. You go to Safeway, you go to Rosar's, you go to Albertsons, you can find those products. You disagree? You can go to Huckleberry's. You can go to Huckleberry's. You can go to Trader Joe's.
Organic food can be certified organic and it can be GMO.
Are you familiar with the foreign food aspect of this? So if you're a foreign food producer, you have to provide a letter of certification stating your product is GMO free. A letter of certification. What does that mean? That means if you're China, you just write out this letter of certification, you provide it to the Washington State Department of Health, your product is certified. How do you know it's GMO free? How do you know what you're really eating with foreign food? Well, what do you think these food companies are going to do? Are they going to continue to jump through the hoops to buy food from our local farmers? Or are they going to go get their letter of certification from a foreign food producer and then sell you a product that you believe is GMO free? So what's going to happen to our farmers? What's going to happen to that farmland? Once we lose that farmland, we will not get it back. What happens when the farmers stop farming? It goes to CRP. Then what? It will not become farmland again. This is detrimental to farmers in the state of Washington. This is why every farm organization in the state of Washington has come out in opposition to I-522. I know I'm probably right at 15 minutes, so I'd be happy to open up to question and answers or go to the rebuttals section.
Well, do Q&A.
There's a Q&A? Mm-hmm. You said there's a bounty hunter provision. Is that section 5.4? The court may award to a prevailing plaintiff? Is that what you're referring to?
You need a copy?
I'm sorry, you thought it was what section?
Section 5. 5 paragraph 4.
Now there's another section here where
Yeah, no, section 5,
Section 5.
number 3. That's probably about.
It is section 5.
And it's number 3.
Yes.
Not nice.
You want to read that so we can see what you meant about bounty hunting?
Yeah, an action to enjoin a violation of this chapter may be brought in any court of competent jurisdiction by any person in the public interest. Any person. You don't have to be a resident of the state of Washington. Any person.
This is not exclusive to this act, though. That is a general provision that's used. Even the Freedom Foundation has used that provision in pursuing the unions. So, well, the AG didn't.
My comment and question, I'm a person that has been under the care of an immunologist for a number of years. I had allergy and asthma at a point that almost caused me to have to retire earlier. But fortunately, I was able to overcome that. I know the opinions of my immunologist, who's quite well known in the field. And my sister, you've got Columbia, I don't know if that's Columbia University.
Columbia Apparel.
Eh?
Apparel.
Columbia Apparel, okay. Well, my sister's got her training from Columbia University in diet. She's done a lot of studying about the scientific side of this. She's also watched her husband die of something, and she has a strong suspicion because of some of the issues that we're talking about. My exposure tells me that the scientific side of this is highly suspect as having caused health problems to the general population. You've talked about technical issues of distribution and law. You've addressed none of the issues of health. Why is that?
Well, because I only had 15 minutes, but I can talk about
What if
that.
we gave it to you?
Well, I'm more than happy to talk about it.
Okay.
GMOs, GEs, GMs, whatever you want to call them, have been around for decades. No food product has been more thoroughly tested in the history of food consumption than these products. We talk about those other 62, 64 countries. It kind of depends on which day they're talking about, because the numbers do change. But some of the countries they're talking about are Zimbabwe, Ethiopia. Last time I checked, they were not scientific leaders in food production. We're also talking about countries that put horse meat into the food chain. We're talking about Ireland. We're talking about France. So yes, food is a very personal, intimate item. And if you want, as an individual, to avoid those, you have that choice right now. You have the right to go buy those foods. No one is stopping you from doing that.
How does he know what to buy?
Because if you buy USDA organic, it is guaranteed to be GMO free.
No, it
How
isn't.
do you know
can-
it's organic?
No, that is not true. You can buy GMO seed, grow it organically, and label it certified organic.
That's right.
That is not true.
Well, so if you want to talk about that, let's talk about the BT. We started talking about BT a little bit. How many of you?
I didn't want to talk about that. I just wanted to point out that how does he know?
Well, you can also buy that non-GMO certified project. Those products are certified by the manufacturer to be GMO free.
Can I just ask a question? So what you're saying, I just want to go down that train of thought, is that the farmer now who farms genetically engineered products in our state is some corn, a little bit of canola, and a little bit of sugar beet. We don't have a lot of that going on here right now. So what you're saying is the farmer who farms that and signs a contract because he knows that he farms it, and can follow it up the chain, like if you're going to grow soft white wheat or red hard wheat, it just follows up the chain. So right now, as it stands, the farmers who don't farm this have to prove that they don't farm it. So is that what I'm hearing? If we don't label.
If you don't label,
If we don't label, and a farmer doesn't want to grow this, it's like telling a farmer, well, if you want to not grow this, you have to prove that you're not growing genetically engineered crops. So you need to go through the non-GMO project, or you need to go through organic. The farmer says, well, I don't want to go through all the processes of going through organic because it's going to cost me money. I'm a small farmer, and it's expensive to be certified organic. So I'm just going to do the non-GMO project, which there's a huge waiting list to get on that because there's a huge demand because people are wanting to buy non-GMO. So you're saying that the proof and the burden is on the farmer who doesn't farm it to prove that they don't farm it,
Well,
rather than the farmer that does farm it. I'm just going to go down that thought
right.
process.
So it goes back to that cross-contamination. By 2019, you can have zero cross-contamination.
And can you
So-
show me where that is in here, where it says 2019 zero? And where exactly that says that? Because right now with the organic law, there actually is a % of contamination that's allowable because that is enforced upon them because of the contamination issues. So I just want to see where it says by 2019 in here, that it's going to be 0% contamination.
It's section 3, subsection 3E. That's where it says July 1st, 2019.
Mm-hmm.
Subsection 3E. Do not account for more than 0.9%
Less than
of the
1%.
total weight of the processed food. That doesn't say 0%. That's not 0%. That's not following, kind of following what the guidelines are on an international level. So that's actually not 0%. And so it's the allowable, and there has to be an allowable because of cross-contamination.
If I may say something about cross-contamination, I know that Monsanto also has something called terminator gene. And the challenge that you have with genetically modified crops like this is that you have drift. And right now, Monsanto has all the legal muscle and prosecutes those people who are downwind from genetically modified crops, who inadvertently have their crops contaminated with this genetically modified stuff and wind up suing them for stealing from Monsanto.
That's actually not true.
That absolutely is true.
Yeah, and terminator gene, they're not
It
actually.
should be the other way
that's not
around.
out-
That
that's
person
not
should
out
be able
there.
to sue the
That's not
GMO.
being-
or
that's
Should
not
be able to, but they
regulated.
can't.
So the terminator gene, they have that technology, but it's not actually being implemented.
You said you wanted to talk about the multinational corporations and the money stuff. And then you use Cyrus O'Leary's, and I don't believe they're an international corporation.
Right. I was being sarcastic. They're a local business that would be very affected by this.
In the case of Cyrus O'Leary's, you said that they wouldn't be able to sell pies in the state of Washington. I don't understand that. What prevents them from selling pies in the state of
I
Washington?
don't understand that either.
So under 522, they want a warning label. They have flat out said that they want a warning label with a skull and crossbone, saying that this product could be hazardous to your health.
Where does it say that? I don't see. Could you show me
It's
that?
not in
Can you show
here.
me
That comes from their campaign.
Okay, so if Cyrus O'Leary's, we're not prevent, with a label, if Cyrus O'Leary's puts a label on it, it just says contains genetically engineered foods, they're still gonna sell pies.
No, it's more than that. They want there has to be a warning label. Your campaign has said there must be a warning label that this product. But your campaign has said that
Show
this.
the section in the law that
But
says
I'm
that.
talking about the campaign and what folks have talked about on the campaign. They want a skull and crossbones.
Who on the campaign said that?
Yeah,
I don't,
I would really like to know who that is, because I know the people that are in the campaign, and I've never heard them once say that.
That's speaking for different people. It's not speaking for the campaign. The campaign is solely on the right to know and the right to choose, solely. And so if you have a pie, and another thing is, we're not asking you to stop selling anything. It's asking people just to make an informed decision. It's like, this is what it is, this is what it contains. They're still gonna sell pies. We're not asking to stop anything. What I would like to know is, what are the companies that said they won't do business in the state of Washington? There's specific names of these companies. Because when you have 90 or 80% or 90% of the population wanting labeling and wanting to know what they eat, that's what you're saying, that all these farmers are gonna disappear. And that's not gonna happen, because the demand is there.
again,
Go ahead.
if this was just a simple labeling bill, it'd be a completely different story. It's not. Nothing could be further from the truth.
Well, and if I'm a consumer and I want to tell my farmer what I want to say to you, I prefer not to choose to eat this. Can you please farm this to me? Supply this for me. Right now, they don't have that. The person who has the label is these companies, and so I don't have a choice anymore. And so like this farmer in Pasco that was just on the news, who farms genetically engineered corn, but he doesn't want to farm it, but the seed company told him they can't provide him with non-genetically engineered seed because there's not a demand, it's hard to get. And the demand is because we don't have a label, and the same farmer says, I want it labeled, and I also don't want to eat it, but I'm growing it because I have to. So to me, it's a win-win for the farmers and for the people, because there's a communication going, and it is a free market. And I think that kind of that tactic of saying that all of a sudden Cyrus is going to sell pies, that's just not founded. It's just unfounded. If you look at the price of ketchup in the UK and the price of ketchup after the labeling, there was absolutely no increase in cost. I made and manufactured cookies, and I packaged them and I sold them. And if there's nothing, I've gone back and I've retraced the steps. If it's signed, there's no way my packaging would have cost me more to put that on my label. Now, if a company decides that they want to source and go non-genetically engineered, then that's their prerogative. I mean, like Whole Foods has decided to do that. I mean, that's...
It is, and if the consumers want that, the consumers will support that.
Right. But right now, we don't, like you're saying, how can we know what's genetically engineered and what's not genetically engineered? I mean, how do you know?
Well, you have to be able to trust that non-GMO certified project or USDA
But
organic.
then you're putting a proof back onto the burden on the farmer, and you don't have that.
Can we go on to one last question?
I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, there's other people.
I know.
Brian.
I did.
Martin had his hand up for a while, sorry.
Well, it's more of an observation, again, as I made very clear, there are good intentions in all this. But, we're so used to government taking care of everything, and I'm reading this thing and I see the Department of Health having a field day. You don't want to know. They're going to set standards. The standards may be like the fish standard that we've got. If you're familiar with that one, we won't get into that. So I think they need to go back to the drawing boards, and I think that you're going to put this together, you're going to have to be more careful and maybe with a lot less oversight. Look, if somebody says my product's non-GMO and they sell it that way, okay? And you find out it's not, you sue them into oblivion. But nobody seems to think of that. Now, that's a pretty simple step, isn't it?
It is.
You learn to say, non-GMO, fine, you do it, we're done, we'll own everything you have. And I can assure you, knowing the business community, and most of us do, it won't take many of those examples to straighten everybody out in a hurry. So I think that this could lead into things that we don't want to get involved in, allowing, particularly in the state of Washington, a very left-wing Department of Health that could just bury us with regulations. And I've said my piece. Any comment?
That's exactly right.
Last question?
Yeah, I feel that, yes, we don't want trust government agencies to deal with this, but this is an important health issue. And let me state that the initiative, if it is passed, can be changed shortly. And for example, year after year, Mr. Hyman comes up with a tax bill that 18 months later in the legislature, they're raising the taxes even though the tax bill doesn't. So I would suggest, rather than both sides fighting back and forth and with scare tactics. If we get this situation started, depend on our legislators when the limitation on the initiative is up, where they can tweak it, they can tweak these things and take all these things out of it. And everybody has the right to know. The scare tactics I've heard on both sides border on ridiculous, because this initiative can be changed in 18 months to meet all the criteria if the people need it, if the farmers need it. So I think both sides are going way out of proportion, and this could be handled readily.
I just want to comment about the legal aspect of this. I happen to have a close relative who did legal counsel for the chemical companies. He lived in Houston forever. And he just brought up, like, the farm fish was an example. How many crazy lawsuits have there been over farm fish? It basically follows the same thing. It's the same guidelines. The rate of lawsuits would be the same.
Last question, Dave.
In this discussion, we've heard that in 2019, there will be zero tolerance. And then we later look it up and find that in reality, it is a limited tolerance. But there is a tolerance. Tonight, we've also heard that there's a skull and crossbones supposed to go on. If there's a problem, then we find that this is someone apparently that supports this, that says that they would like to see that, okay? The things that we've heard here that are stated as facts and then demonstrated right here that it's not a fact causes a great distrust of the representative that's opposing this, in my mind.
It's 0.09 up to 2019. After 2019, it becomes 0.
Well, we'll leave it there. I really appreciate you guys coming. Thank you, Brian, very
Yes.
much. Thank you. Well, I thank you all for coming, and I think that concludes our program tonight. And